So our Torah portion, Chayeh Sarah, the life of Sarah, and it begins in Genesis chapter 23 and verse 1, and it goes over into Genesis chapter 25, verse 18. By the way, we will not have service this Wednesday night. You should have gotten an announcement about that. And everybody on the live stream should know that. We will not have service next Shabbat here because I want to spend time with my family. I want you to spend time with your family. And I know that we're all family, but sometimes we need to look after that other part of the family too, right? We need some time to do those kinds of things. So I want us all to do that. And all of you who are joining us on the live stream want you to do that as well. However, I went ahead and recorded a teaching for next Shabbat. And so that will be on YouTube for those of you who want to tune in and watch that. And I'm assuming that it'll post at our normal service time. Brandon, can you affirm that yet one way or the other?
Yes.
Oh, well, yes, thank you very much. All right. So just to let you know that. So actually, this will be our last time to get together this way for a couple of weeks. All right? So then, that being said, I want you to listen up very carefully to me. I want you to listen very carefully to what I have to say. And don't hear what you think I'm saying, hear what I'm actually saying. Okay? If you doze off or if you get distracted or something and you come in mid-sentence, you might think I said something I didn't say. So it's going to be very important that you listen to me. And by the way, for you folks who are visiting us, welcome, shalom, glad you're here. You've chosen to be here on a very interesting day. At least that's the way I see it. But it's called Chayeh Sarah, the life of Sarah, which is very interesting, and considering that it begins with her death. But Genesis 23, verses 1 and 2. Sarah lived, Chayeh Sarah, 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And so Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And so Sarah's death occurred shortly after, some people say, because of the binding of Isaac. In fact, this is why Abraham had to get up early in the morning and kind of head out before she woke up, because she would have stopped him. If has any guy ever been in that situation? You got something you think like you need to do, but if she finds out about it, she's going to have something to say about it. I've never had that experience personally, but anyway, I just. But I want you to see this. Her death provoked Abraham to take action. Something happened that provoked him to take action. That particular action was he had to purchase a property. And so he goes and he appeals to Ephron the Hittite to sell him at the cave, or in the field in the cave at Machpelah, which means to double. It was believed to be a double compartment or something like that. But the whole idea of Machpelah is it means to double. And again, because it had these double compartments. And in fact, if you go there today, there's a lot of doubles there. You go and visit the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, the tomb of Isaac and Rebekah, and the tomb of Jacob and Leah. And I've been there once, and it's a very interesting place. But anyway, this is what he had to do. Something happened, and it provoked him to take action. And in buying property for Sarah's burial, he does something very, very important beyond just the purchase of the property. He's not just doing something for the sake of one who has passed. He's doing something for the sake of future generations. Because with that particular transaction at Machpelah, what he's doing is he's purchasing a very important piece of land for all time. In fact, you go there today, Abraham, Sarah, there's this spiritual imprint that was placed there because Abraham did this. And so that was for all time. And when he made this transaction sure, as the Bible tells us, he legally possessed property in the land. Before this, he was just a sojourner. He dwelt among these people in the land, and they had to cooperate with him. In fact, he said, I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. That's how he considered himself. That's how he defined himself. But with the purchase of this particular property, he legally began to possess the land. Of course, a small piece, but it led to other things. In fact, it was the very first step of many steps whereby Abraham and his seed were taking possession of the land. And I want to suggest to you that maybe because he understood the greater importance of this. That's why he didn't squabble with Ephron. Ephron, he's wanting to make out like he's this benevolent kind of a guy. What's a fortune among us? It only costs this many, this much money, which was quite expensive, but he didn't squabble. And I'm going to suggest to you the reason he didn't is because, again, he saw the greater importance of what was going on. Would it be fair to say that Abraham, a man of faith as he was a rather insightful man? If you can leave everything behind and go to a place that God is going to show you, you must have some confidence and some insight that God is going to do exactly what he said he was going to do. Would that be a fair statement? So he knew what needed to be done, and so he took action. And because he did, it ensured continuity in the land. So then, that brings me to this thought. When it comes to God's purposes, he doesn't do temporary. Some things seem that way to us, but God doesn't do temporary. If God breathes something into existence, it is with the intention that it lives. And just to kind of prove the point, when we, through sin, introduced death in the world, what did he do? He provided a lamb from the foundation of the world whereby you and I, through faith, can have eternal life. In other words, he doesn't do temporary. He does eternal. So even if it seems temporary to us, God's purposes are always looking to the future from generation to generation. Everything he does, even the things that he does today, has a purpose. Your life, my life, our congregation's life, the body at large, everything has a purpose. But also in Abraham's story, and this part of the story, we clearly see that the end of one cycle is always the beginning of another. Sarah's death is apparently what motivated Abraham to not only purchase a piece of property, but to find a wife for Isaac. Again, he knew what he had to do, and so he took action. Genesis 24, verses 1 through 4. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And so Abraham said to the oldest servant of his house, who ruled over all that he had, "Please put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family, and take a wife for my son Isaac." So it is very evident that he did not want Isaac to be married to any of the daughters of Heth, as Esau would do. He was very clear about that. And it's also very evident that even though he didn't know who this woman was, he doesn't have Rebekah's name at this point. He doesn't know who that particular woman was, but he was very adamant that that woman was to come from among his family. When he knew he had to buy a burial plot, he knew exactly what he wanted. He said, "I want to purchase that particular cave." And so there are certain elements of what he knew he had to do that were made very plain, even if the outcome was still somewhat unresolved. In other words, again, he didn't know who Rebekah was. He just knew that it was time for his son to have a wife, and it was to come from among his people. He didn't want the woman to come from among the Canaanites. And by the way, he didn't want Isaac to go find his own wife. He sent a servant to do this on his behalf. Now, I'm tempted to kind of go down that trail for just a minute. I'm going to restrain myself because I have some other things I want to share with you. But I just want you to think about our day and time and our culture and our kids. Can you imagine if your son, you tell your son, "I'm going to send my friend and the guy I work with to go someplace that you've never been, and I'm going to find a wife for you. And when she gets here, you marry her, love her, and take care of her." "Yes, Dad." Times have changed, haven't they? We have changed, but God has not. God has not. He still operates and does things the way he's always done. Now, it's also very clear that Abraham was not just searching for a wife for his son. He was searching for a matriarch, a companion for his wife, that together they would continue what God had started with Abraham and with Sarah. He wanted a noble woman for his son. He wanted to make sure that Isaac was wed before he passed from this life. He wanted to make sure of these things, and he was certain of this. Now, again, he didn't know who Rebekah was, but he knew it was time. He had that sense. He had the provocation. And then the fact that he wants Isaac to be wed before he passes kind of raises something else up, or brings something else to light. This is a truth that we see again and again and again in the scripture, and that is this, that God always raises up someone to carry on the plan before he removes another. It doesn't seem to me anyway, that he takes one out before he has somebody ready to step in that place. Joshua was there all along that journey with Moses, preparing, being discipled, and when it was time for Moses to be taken out of the way, Joshua was ready to step into that place. It's a different scenario, but Samuel was being raised in the tabernacle even as Eli and his sons were doing all the bad things they were doing. Point being is before he took Eli out, he made sure that he had Samuel in place. And of course, then John comes on the scene and he's baptizing and he's preaching the kingdom of heaven's at hand, et cetera, et cetera. But when Yeshua comes on the scene, he says, now I must decrease that he may increase. Not before, but when Yeshua is ready to step into the mission the Father had given to him. And so again, God always raises up someone to carry the plan forward before he removes that other person. And so I'm going to recommend to you in that same vein of thought that he always has the next part of the plan in place when it's time to move in that direction. And again, he uses one situation to prompt us to take that step. Sarah's death prompted him to buy that piece of property. Sarah's death prompted him to send Eleazar to Syria to fetch a wife for his son. So hit the pause button on the Bible and let's just kind of turn it to our world today. In just a few days, we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. And we've made that about food and football and all of those kinds of things. And I enjoy the food part, don't get me wrong. I skip the football, go straight to the nap. But we're looking forward to that because it's a time we get together with family. And we sometimes forget why that came to be, why we have this custom. I mean, we all know the story about the pilgrims because they're, in American history anyway, they're the ones who initiated this particular custom. And, there are some people who believe they based it on Sukkot, and I don't have a problem with that. But we know some of the story. But are you aware of how they ended up in Plymouth, or even why they ended up in Plymouth? Some people don't know that. You see, originally, they were not to be in Massachusetts. Originally, they were to establish a colony at the mouth of the Hudson River, which would be present-day New York. However, they were blown off course. This is a people who had moved from one place to another. They started out in England, they were persecuted. They had to go to Holland, and eventually they were persecuted. And they went back to England. And then from England, they got on a boat and they came to the New World. But as I said, they were supposed to come to the New World, establish a colony at the mouth of the Hudson River in present-day New York. But on their journey over, there were lots of storms. One was almost put an end to the whole expedition and could have destroyed everybody along with it. But they survived that, and they ended up, because of this storm, they ended up landing on Cape Cod in November of 1620. And after some exploration, after a lot of prayer, they came to realize that though they had intended to go to the mouth of the Hudson River, that God used a storm to bring them to this particular place. And they ended up settling in Plymouth, what we call Plymouth, Massachusetts. And when they got there, as it turned out, they found an area where fields had been cleared. Some fields were already somewhat prepped for sowing. It was almost like the land was prepared for them. The reason that happened, because there was a tribe that used to live there. I probably will mispronounce this, but Patuxent, that's the way I'm going with it. And if you know better, you can correct me after no one's looking. Anyway, this particular tribe who had lived in this area had been mysteriously decimated 3 years prior to the pilgrims' arrival by some mysterious plague. In other words, it was as if, and this was their interpretation, and you can look this up in the history books, it was as if God had prepared this place for them. Not the one they intended to be at, but this is the place that God had prepared for them. In fact, if they had arrived 3 years sooner, they would have been met with a very hostile tribe of people. And so they were convinced that God had gone before them. My point, God always has the next step prepared for his people, even before they even start thinking about it. How many times in the life of this congregation, and some of you know this, but how many times in the life of this congregation has God already provided for us before we even knew we needed that provision? We have a history with that. We have experience with God doing that. So, like the pilgrims, in an apples and oranges way, obviously, we have that kind of history. We know that God has done that in times past. He prepared the way for them before they even knew that this is what they needed. But the challenge for us and others, just like it was for the pilgrims, is, do we have the courage to follow through? Being old, Abraham could not make the journey to Syria, so he called the elder of his household. And the Bible tells us that this man controlled all that was his. He trusted this man. And even though he's not mentioned here, in Genesis 15, he is mentioned as Eliezer. And it's understood that this is the man that he's referring to, which, by the way, Eliezer means, my God helps. That's his name. So might it be that Abraham, when he's sensing the time has come for Isaac to have a son, and I can't make the journey, I need God's help. I need God's help to continue and to bring to fruition that which he has charged me with. And he realizes this. And so this man, again, presumed to be Eliezer, was understood to be one of Abraham's very first disciples. In turn, being one of his disciples, he would teach others. And so Eliezer, the helper, is also the teacher. And he serves to lead others into truth. And so obviously this is a hint for us that we must rely upon the Spirit of God who helps us, who teaches us, who leads us, right? The Spirit of truth, Yeshua said, will guide you into truth and tell you things to come. So my understanding is not only will he teach me and lead me in the ways of righteousness and teach me what truth is and how to walk in that truth, but he will lead me, he'll lead you, he'll lead us every step of the way. But I would suggest to you that also means that you and I have to be discerning. We have to be keen to listen to the voice of God in all this. Eliezer's mission was to go to Syria and find a bride for Isaac. And he raises this issue when he's talking to Abraham. What if she will not come with me? In other words, Abraham, what if what you have in mind doesn't happen? What if it doesn't work out that way? Now, the first thing that Abraham says in reply to that is, or in response to that is, the Lord will send his angel before you. So Abraham is convinced that because God has told me, in Isaac shall your seed be called, that I'm going to make you the father of many nations. In you and through you and your seed, the nations of the world are going to be blessed. He believed God and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. He knew that God would keep that promise. And so he said, the angel of the Lord will go before you. He will send his angel before you. But he also says, if she decides not to come with you, if it doesn't work out that way, I'm going to release you from your oath. But God, he knows that a bride for Isaac is the next step in what has to happen. It plays a very important role in God's promise. But again, if she doesn't come with you, you're released from your oath. At least he's acknowledging the possibility that what he desired might not occur. But at the same time, he is very confident that now is the time because he had a promise. He sees things taking shape. And so there had to be some way for this promise to come to pass. And so he sent his servant Eliezer, with 10 camels. That Hebrew word for camel means a burden bearer. And what burden are these camels bearing to Syria? Lots of gifts, lots of presents, lots of treasure. And he travels to Syria. And then he gets to a well. And in chapter 24, verse 12, he says this, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also give your camels drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this, I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. In other words, he prayed a very specific prayer. He had this understanding that the answer to that very specific prayer would be an indication of God's kindness to Abraham. In other words, that indeed the Lord had sent his angel before him. He, what we used to call, maybe we still do call, laid out a fleece before the Lord. I'm not really sure about this, but if this is you, I'm going to lay this fleece out before you and I'm going to see what you say. How many of you have ever done that before? Just a few of you. I'm really surprised that I'm among few who's done that, okay? Yeah, a lot of us have done that. Now, that's not the same as, oh God, if you'll heal me of this, I'll never do that again. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, I'm not sure what it is, the next step that you want me to do, but I'm going to lay this fleece before you, and if this happens, then I'm going to believe that this is an indication of your favor, and we're on the right track here. I take it that's what he did. He laid a fleece before the Lord as he undertook to fulfill his mission. And I'm not going to say this has never happened to me, but I'm going to say it's a rare thing. The response was just like that. I mean, he doesn't even have the words out of his mouth, and here comes Rebekah, already making her way to the well. It was as if God had set things up. It was as if God had already started doing things before Eleazar even made it to that well. It was as if he was already working on the other side, and all that needed to happen was for Abraham to send Eleazar to show up at the well and pray that prayer, and boom, there it was. Yes, let that happen. Eleazar is astonished at all this, and he sees his prayers are being answered. And as it turns out, God had led him to the very place and to the very people that he was supposed to go. And we used to call this a divine appointment. Those encounters that occur when we're just kind of walking through life, and then later on you realize, wow, that was a divine encounter. I didn't realize that at the time maybe, but it was. Because what it means is God is behind the scenes orchestrating events. God goes before his people to work out the path that they are destined to walk. And if he did it for them, we have to believe that he'll do it for us. Amen? Now, here's something else that's very interesting, astounding. Rebekah agreed to marry Isaac, sight unseen. Now, how many of you young girls, if a man who works for a relative that you've never met showed up at your house and said, I got all these presents, and if you'll marry my master's son, then all these are yours, and just come with me and marry this guy, and you would go, sounds good. But she did. She did kind of like what Abraham did. She left everything behind. She left country, family, her father's house, and she goes and marries a man sight unseen, and eventually she gives birth to Jacob, who later becomes Israel. She had to leave everything behind, and I want you to catch this. She followed Eliezer. My God helps. she had to respond as well to Eliezer, as it were. And if that is a picture of you and I being dependent upon the Spirit of God, we have to be very, very receptive and open to what the Spirit is leading us to do, even when it goes against our logic. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm setting you up for something. But because she's willing to be led by the helper, she brings forth fruit, and she ensures continuity of God's plan. At the conclusion of this portion, it says that Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. It says, and the Lord blessed Isaac, his son, after the death of his father Abraham. And then we see that Isaac inherited the promises that were given to Abraham because he was the son of promise. But the story doesn't end there. The end of one story is simultaneously the beginning of another, and the story goes on. And so that's a very, very quick, perhaps, overview of what this Torah portion has to share. But I'm going to do something I don't typically do. I'm going to kind of go forward a little bit into the next Torah portion, Toledot, which is, really focused on the story of Jacob and Esau. But I want us to look at something in the middle of that Torah portion, something that I believe has bearing on what I feel is being conveyed to us, this congregation at this particular time. So we read in the Torah portion, Isaac and Rebekah are in the land, and then a famine came. And that famine, just like one famine forced Abraham to go down to Egypt, this famine kind of compels Isaac and Rebekah to go into the land of the Philistines, specifically in the land of Gerar. And by the way, Isaac is told very adamantly, do not go to Egypt. So while he is in the land of the Philistines, the Bible says that God blessed Isaac to the point that the Philistines became very envious of him. In fact, he planted, it seems to be hinted at anyway, in a time of famine, and yet he planted and he received 100-fold, which, as I understand it, that's just an idiomatic expression of saying that's as good as it gets. It's just, incredible amount of yield on that seed. And this, obvious blessing and this favor of God that was upon him, it caused the Philistines to envy him. And so in chapter 26, verse 15, it says, now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, and they had filled them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. Anytime we hear somebody say that about God's people, it always has some negative consequences. But anyway, it says, then Isaac departed from there, and he pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar, and dwelt there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he called them by the names which his father had called them. Now, this is my opinion, but it seems to me that the Philistines, who are already envious of Isaac, filled up those wells simply because Abraham had dug them. In other words, it seems to me anyway, they did it out of spite. And if you live in a land that is prone to drought and famine, it seems rather counterproductive to go and to fill in wells just because somebody you don't particularly care for happened to be the one who dug them. That's what we used to call cutting off your nose to spite your face. Right? However, Isaac was determined to uncover those wells and to renew the work his father had done, to make sure that there was continuity, that what God had given Abraham to do, that this was going to be continued. And so we read on in verse 19. Also Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water, literally Mayim Chaim, living water. Found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen, saying, the water is ours. And so he called the name of the well Esek, which means contention, because they quarreled with him. And then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. And so he called its name Sitnah, which means strife. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. And so he called its name Rehoboth, which means wide places. Because he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. So his servants go out and they dig a well, and no sooner had they dug that well than his neighbors came and laid claim to it. Said, this is ours. So he doesn't argue. He goes on, he makes or digs another well. And like it was with the first one, they come and they say, this well is ours. You need to keep moving. And so he did, until he came to the next place. And on the third move, he said, the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. In Deuteronomy 31:8, it says, and the Lord, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed. Will you play that video, please?
Jacob's tent. You are a tree that I have planted. My Jacob's tent, you are a tree that I have planted. And you will grow and you will extend branches, and many will come and be fed of the fruit that I am producing in this house. My people, I am pleased. I am pleased. You are my people. I am well pleased. Be not afraid to grow and extend. Be not afraid to extend those branches out and grow your roots, sink those stakes in. For I have called this place to existence for the nations to come, to know my commandments, my precepts and statutes. I am with you this day and every day. Be not afraid for what's to come. I will never leave you nor forsake you, for I am with you. I am with you.
And the Lord, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you, and he will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed. Now, what I'm about to say, I say with great trepidation. I say in the fear of God. I've been up most of the night, and I have been praying, God, I need your help. You are my helper. I need your help. I want you to know that the reason we played this is because what I'm about to tell you, I'm not just saying it just flippantly or because, none of the reasons that someone might be tempted to think. I believe that we received a word from the Lord. I believe that. And that's not the first indication that we've ever had. If you've been around this congregation, you know that this is not the first indication that the Lord was kind of, stirring us and pressing us and, encouraging us. And I think all of us who are really part of this congregation know that and realize that. So again, I said it then, I say it now. I believe that that was a word from the Lord. And for all of us, the word said, don't be afraid. But I want to be just real transparent with you here for just a second. Well, no, not just for a second, throughout. But I have been afraid. I have been fearful. I have been concerned. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. And I've been afraid to do some things. And it's just being honest. But something happened this week, and I felt like now's the time. Some things happened that provoke us to take action. Things have happened that provoke us to go beyond knocking and asking. So I want to share some things with you. As again, I said, I do this with great trepidation. I want you to listen carefully. Listen carefully. Hear clearly. Not what you think I say, but what I say. So with that understanding, there will be nothing that I say that I feel is a, quote, thus says the Lord. Okay? Did you hear me? Okay. Now, see, what's going to happen is I'm going to say some things, and some people I predict will say, well, Bill said this. when in reality, Bill said that, all right? So I'm not going to say anything that I feel should be prefaced with, thus says the Lord. But you will hear me say things that are reflective of the impressions that I and others have on what seems to be his guidance. I am very confident, I will say this, I am extremely confident that now is the time to me to present some things to you. Okay? I've been asking you to pray about something that I've been kind of tight-lipped about, and y'all kind of, hint and guess and things like that. But I've been intentionally kind of cryptic, but now it's time to be very clear, and it's time to be very precise, or as precise as I know how. The first meeting we ever had was in February of 2016. Some of you were there. Some of you were there. 2019, I'm sorry. Yeah, that wouldn't be right. Anyway, 2019. And some of you that were there are still here. Amazing. But from that first day, would it be fair to say that Jacob's tent has always been cramped? From day one, that's right. It was certainly that way at Inman Street, wasn't it? And it's that way here. I mean, for the most part. And whether at Inman, whether here, we've dealt with it the best way we know how. Remember back when we were at Inman and remember the days when we would go in, we'd meet, and then after the service, we'd move the chairs out, everybody move out of the way, we'd flip the tables, and we'd all have Oneg there. We lined up in that hallway, and we were, doing this, How many of you remember those days? But we did it, and we were glad to do it. We were glad to be there, right? So it's kind of that way here. And back over at Inman, you remember it got to the point that we just couldn't be, we were just too crowded. And I think it was Sung Won who stared at that block wall and started praying that those other people would move out. And they did. And we rented that part of the building. And we made it a word that is forbidden to be used in the office these days, an overflow. So if you hear any of the staff talking about the O word, that's what it means, the overflow. And as I recall, we kind of filled that side of the building up too. And we were always divided though. We doubled, but it was, we were still divided, but we did it. And we were glad to do it. We were happy to do it. It was inconvenient at times. It was certainly cramped all the time. And most of you probably didn't know this. Some of you did. But there wasn't a Shabbat that I can recall anyway, when by the time we had doubled, that I didn't come in and there wasn't some drama going on about all of the businesses around us complaining because we were taking up all their parking spaces. It was continual. This is ours. Y'all have got to move on. But we adjusted, right? And so we got here. And we adjusted how we do things when we got here because we have the space that we have. It's laid out the way it is. But Nayla said something the other day that it really resonated with me, among other things. She said several things that resonated, but this one in particular. Even here, where we can kind of meet in the same room to have service, in some ways we're still kind of divided up and sectioned off. Almost every Shabbat we have young people that march over to someone else's property so that they can meet. We've got people who are part of this congregation because of the tight quarters and cramped space and all the people. They feel a little bit more comfortable staying at home watching the live stream, and then they'll maybe join us later on. The point is that we've always been cramped, always. And I think for the most part, have dealt with it fairly well. We've done what we had to do. But I think all of us have always known, or at least we've always suspected, that this would not be our last stop. Am I right in that? Okay. So, in that vein of thought, back in 2020, COVID was going on. Everything was shut down. People were moving out of California and Oregon and Washington State. A lot of them ended up here, right? Because they had to get out of that nonsense over there. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Anyway, out of those places. And they were coming into this and other areas of the country. And for those of us who'd lived here a long time, we all of a sudden saw all of these real estate prices just going through the roof, and the demand was high and the supply was low. And Jacob's Tent happened to have some funds that were designated for the future, and we took those funds and we bought some property, and the property's still out there today. Okay? I'll come back to that. When we started out at Inman, we didn't know what was going to happen. I certainly didn't. When I was first approached by my family, actually, to do this, I thought, we might have a group or fellowship of 75 or 80 people or something like that. We didn't have any idea what was going to happen, particularly me. But we were walking by faith. We were just putting one step in front of the other, doing what we knew to do. And we're still doing that right now. Now, I want to mention this. Some of you know this. Some of you were there. But when we first started meeting in Inman, in that first space, that space had years before been occupied by another congregation that was called Beth Avorah. The Davises were there, the Fullwoods were there. I don't know, there might have been some others that were there. Beth and I were part of that at the very beginning. Beth and I were, I'd say, a big part of that at the beginning. Not in that building, but that congregation, which started in a living room and kind of expanded from there. We were part of that congregation. Now, we weren't, as she said, part of that congregation when they were in that particular building. But that's where that congregation was, in that space that you and I occupied in Inman, when that congregation, Marlene, would this be the proper term, dissolved? That would be the proper term? So that's where that congregation ended. And then others moved in, and then all of a sudden, Brandon calls me about some space downtown. And I go in there, and I'm like, I think I've been here before. Come to find out, it was where that congregation was when they dissolved. And so I'm reading the Torah portion and the next Torah portion, and I'm like, are we unearthing a well here? We didn't rent that space because we were thinking that way. You have to understand. The reason we rented that space is because that's all there was. In fact, Brandon pointed this out to the staff. Every step we've made in terms of where we have been is always been because that's what was available. That's what was there. It wasn't because we were like, oh yes, I see into the future and all of these patterns are going to be fulfilled. No, it was nothing like this. We're like, this is all we got. We got to make it work. So we took that step. And a lot of you who are part of that, you know how that went. But then what happened? We dug that well, and then people came in and said, y'all going to have to move on because it was theirs. By the way, it occurred to me this morning, Jacob's Tent has been about digging wells. How many? I estimated it's somewhere between 12 and 15 at this point, so something like that. So we started looking for another space, and a lot of you were involved with that. And those of you who were involved with that, you remember there wasn't a whole lot to choose from. There wasn't a whole lot going on. There was not a lot that we could make work for what we do. We just couldn't locate anything. And at one point, I was approached about contacting a particular church here in town because they had a pretty good bit of space, and their church was kind of diminishing in size. And so I was approached, maybe you should talk to them and see if you can work out something to rent some space for them since you guys meet on Saturday and they meet on Sunday. And I went over there. Bottom line, it didn't work out. But I, got to see this place. Now, eventually, Let me stop. There is a reason that I'm going into all this kind of detail. Because I want you to understand what has brought us to this point. It's really, I think, important for you to understand what has brought us to this point. So we had to move from Inman, and eventually Cody and Brandon located this place. And many of you men and some of you ladies, you were part of the cleanup. You see, previously, this room that we're in had been a storehouse, warehouse, whatever you want to call it, with shelves that were stocked with Bibles and songbooks and printed biblical material, because Pathway Press was the component of the Church of God that printed all these materials that they sent out to, the churches in the United States and across the world. It was where, we could put it this way, the Word of God was kind of going out in printed form. But when we got here, that's not what was happening. It was buried in junk. And if you were here at the very beginning, you know that Jerry and Brandon and I shouldn't name names because there's so many people. Mike Hoskins and so many others and some of the ladies. And some of the ladies brought lunch. But there was a lot of work that went into unearthing what was here. And I'm using that word on purpose, yes. Because when we got here, it was no longer functioning in the way it had been. It was just buried in junk. So we cleared it out. We uncovered what was here. And guess what? We came here not necessarily convinced because this was what the Father told us to do. I can tell you that was not what we said. It was because, more practically, it was available. And so because it was available and nothing else was, we concluded that this must be what the Father has for us at this time. And so there's never been a time in my life when I had to make a big decision that there was a lightning bolt that came from heaven that had a note attached to it that said, do this, sign God. That has never, ever happened. As I said, Brandon was reminding all of us the other day that everything we've done in those terms, it's always been because that's what was before us. And nothing else was. It's always been that doors closed and we had to knock to see what doors would be open. Now, as far as our present situation, here's how I feel. As I told you, I have been a little scared sometimes. I have been a little intimidated, a little frightened. I mean, I don't want to make too much of this, but I feel the burden. I'll just put it that way. And sometimes it feels pretty overwhelming because I feel like, everybody's looking at me and saying, what's the next thing? What do we do now? And I'm like, what's the next thing? What do we do now? And if I were in your shoes, I'd say, hey, Bill, let me look at that map for a minute. Let me see if I can make anything out of it. I feel the weight of that. And I feel like in some ways we've kind of been like Israel. We left Egypt. Yeah. Banners, pageantry, shouting, trumpets blowing, all these kinds of things. And then God said, turn, I want you to go into this wadi. Go into this, desolate place. And I want you to kind of make your way through this wadi and kind of get pressed in on both sides. And yeah, it'll open up in a little while. You'll be on the beach for a little while. And then you realize we're not going anywhere else for a while. Now, that's kind of how I feel like, restricted. It's been somewhat restrictive. And when we get to the open place, we look out in front and there's this ocean in front of us. This obstacle that is in our pathway, going forward is blocked. And it's something that you and I have no control over whatsoever. Absolutely no control over. Now, we don't have Pharaoh bearing down on us. I get that. But we do have certain pressures that are at work even here. You should know, if you don't already, that the Church of God is actively seeking to sell this property. So once again, we've come in and done a bunch of stuff, and then somebody comes in and says, it's ours. Now, they're not pressing us to move at this point. They're not saying you've got such and such a time. That has not happened. But they have been in negotiation to sell this property. Some people have been in negotiations with them to buy this property. And right now, I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. And there's nothing that's been made very clear to me. We're not sure who the new owner may be. Whoever that turns out to be, they may let us stay. But depending on who that is, and I don't know who that will be, they may not. It might be months, years before they sell it. I don't know. And by the way, you're going to hear me say that a lot here in a minute. I don't know. Okay? And you know what that means? I don't know. That's what it means. So I don't know how that is going to turn out. At this point in this building, we are month to month. Okay? Point is, there are some pressures. There's enough pressure to get me and others, thinking, what would we do if ... Now, at times we thought that there would be more space available here, but right now, that hasn't happened. And it seems that when we felt like we were getting close to there being more space available, something would happen to postpone that. In fact, that caused me to think, okay, well, if that door is shutting, then maybe it's time for me to initiate this. And every time I would go to kind of get something going, something would happen. And it would interrupt that, throw it all up in the air, and it was like God saying, wait. I don't have to remind you that this congregation weathered a storm, and I'm beginning to wonder if it changed our trajectory. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We have just continued to do what we know to do. And so I'm just kind of summarize all that. We dug a well here, in a matter of speaking. But at any point, somebody could come in and say, hey, we're sorry, but this is ours, and it soon will be theirs, and you're going to have to move along. Now, I want to say this. However long God wants us to stay here, that's what we're going to do. If that's 6 months, 6 years, whatever, however long he wants us to stay here and makes that very clear, that's what we will do, and that is in his hands. But I think everybody, to some degree, can recognize the challenges that presents to us, especially when we continually have people say, we're moving to Cleveland. I don't know where we're going to put you, but okay. So as your pastor, and Beth would agree with this as well, I'm starting to be concerned that maybe we're becoming the baby who, when it's time to be delivered, things don't happen. And that baby remains in the womb too long. And at a certain point, if that were to happen, what had been a sanctuary has the potential to become a tomb. In other words, instead of growing and expanding, is there a time and should there be a concern that if we don't listen very carefully and move when the Father tells us to move, that what has been expanding and growth might become contraction and degeneration? So then, just the other day, the staff got together, Beth and me, and we were talking, and we were reminded of something that took shape at our very first meeting in February of 2019 when we met over at the Westmore Church of God, what used to be the Westmore Church of God. And it turns out, as we're going around the table, Beth, Brandon, and I had apparently thought the same thing on that very first meeting. We had been packed into that little youth room with 200 people. Heather was there. Nayla was there. Was anybody else here in that meeting besides Beth and me? Christine, are you raising your hand? Oh, you were there? Okay. All right, we were cramped in there. No big deal, because we didn't know that we were going to have any meetings after that. But we came out of that cramped space, and apparently Brandon, Beth, and me, we looked across the street, and there was a piece of property over there, and we thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to be able to meet in there? That was the extent of it at that point in time. But it was something that kept popping up in my mind, Beth's mind, and others. So as I said earlier, when we were compelled to move out of Inman, someone put me in touch with the leadership of another church called Living Word. And they put me in touch with these people at Living Word to see if we could perhaps work out some kind of arrangement to lease some of their space. And I went, spoke with the leadership, walked around the place, and as I said, it didn't work out. Earlier this year, I was contacted by that same person, who is the same person who arranged for us to purchase the property out on Water Level Highway, to tell me that the Living Word property was for sale. So, months ago, we went and we toured it again, a little bit more extensively this time, walked around, but the asking price was way out of range for us. And so, even though we thought, wow, this would be a great place, all this space and all this kind of stuff, way too much money, we don't have that kind of money. And so we walked away, and we assumed that somebody else would come in and they would purchase the property. And from then to now, several people have gone in and made offers, as I understand it. I don't have all the details, but so far nothing's worked out. So as we were headed to Sukkot, I was contacted again, and I was informed that the price had decreased. Would I be interested in revisiting this? And I thought, this keeps popping up on our radar. But I told the guy, I said, look, I'm going to Sukkot. I'm going to be busy with that. I can't really do anything about this right now. And I went to Sukkot with the idea that probably what's going to happen, they've decreased the price, somebody will come in, they'll buy it, and that'll settle it for me. I can get this off of my mind. Except that's not what happened. Got back from Sukkot and it's still there. So I want you to understand that this property has appeared many, many, many times on our radar. Beth, will you testify that that is true? Heather, can you testify that that is true? I don't know if Robert's in here, but he could testify that that is true. Okay. Robert, is that the truth? Okay. And every time it's popped up on our radar, I pushed it away. I've just kept pushing it away because I didn't want my emotions to get involved. I didn't want my soulish voice becoming God's voice. Do you understand? I didn't want the pressures that I was feeling based on our current situation. I didn't want those pressures to influence me or to provoke me to do something that was rash or imprudent. I kept pushing it away. And I kept just saying, nope. Somebody's going to come in, they're going to take care of that, and that's all going to go away. And then I would start to take actions on other fronts. Just recently, we were in discussions about doing something out on the property to just kind of get a footprint out there and maybe kickstart something in that direction. And things moved in and said, wait. So that's why I'm telling you all these things. I want you to understand all that has happened that has brought me to this place to share these things with you. All these interruptions, these events that have happened, all these things that have forced me to pause on other things and feel that the Lord was saying, wait, not now. So I have to believe, I choose to believe that for whatever reason, maybe for timing's sake, the Lord kept making me wait. How many times have I been asked from members of this congregation, what's going on with the property? And I've told you, we hit the pause button on that and we're waiting. Okay. But now we are at a place where I, as your pastor, and Beth, us together, I don't want a potential, and I want to underscore that word, potential opportunity to pass this by if, and I say if, this is what the Lord has for us. I'd rather be like Abraham when he sees those three men there. He doesn't wait for them to come into his tent or wait to see if they will come into his tent. He runs to them and invites them in, invites the Lord to speak. And that's what I want us to do. I want us to invite the Lord to speak. Even if that means what we thought we were supposed to do turns out not to be what he wants us to do. Brandon, can you show some of that video that you took there so the people can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about? I don't think we necessarily need the audio, if you don't mind, because I'm gonna talk over that. we took the staff over there, as I said. Are you putting some more video up, or is that it?
Yeah, I'll put some more up.
Okay, just do that. Let me interject this. Bill, why are you doing this on Shabbat? Mary, I believe, also had a word from the Lord. And if you were here for that, the word was, what you do quickly. Serena felt impressed with the Lord. That ark had to be prepared because there was coming a day when that door would be closed, right? And we were to be about the Father's business and getting that ready, all right? So that's why I'm taking the time to share this with you. So we went over there with the staff, and you can see some of this used to be the old Pathway bookstore. So we went over there, and as it turns out, Beth, Brandon, myself weren't the only ones who were thinking about this property. Turns out that Nayla, you did say this, right? That you've been going by that property and basically saying, Lord, why don't you give us that property right there? Right? Okay. Heather was riding by that place and saying, Lord, why don't you give us that property right there? And so as this is starting to kind of come out now, I'm going, okay. So I've been wondering, okay, has the Lord been prepping us for this particular moment? So I only found out that this week. So I want to be very clear about this now. No one on the staff has said, thus says the Lord, this is it, get it. Nobody has said that. But at the same time, no one on staff has said, there's a check in my spirit, and I don't think we should do this. Again, circumstances keep bringing us back to this place. And so maybe we need to entertain the notion that this might be the Lord. Did you hear me say might? Okay? Remember what I said at the beginning. You're not going to hear me say, thus says the Lord. You're going to hear me say things that I'm impressed to bring this to your attention. But maybe he's guiding us in this direction. I've been wrestling with this for weeks, months, and that is why, this is what I want you to hear very clearly from me, folks. I'm inviting you to pray more specifically now. I've invited you to pray about what the next step would be, and now I want to make it very clear to you what I need you to join with me in prayer about. Okay? So I've been given some information recently that gave me some ideas, and we've been discussing some of those ideas, how we might make this happen. But the more we discussed all these different ideas, the more questions were raised, and how are we going to deal with this issue, and how are we going to deal with that scenario, and da-da-da-da-da. And finally, it just felt like a big ball of string that I was trying to untangle and figure out on my own. And I don't mean just me personally, but us trying to figure out how to do it. And that's when I realized I'm putting God in a box, and I don't need to do that. I need to take the burden off of me, and I need to put it on him. And I'm not going to try to untangle all of the string. I'm just going to say, if this is you, Lord, then you have to work this out. I don't want to have to be in a place to, or any of us, to figure out how this is supposed to happen. And so that's when I was stuck. I couldn't get any further, and that's what I realized. I can't figure this out. I shouldn't figure this out. This is for the Lord to do. Right? Would you agree with that? This is for the Lord to do. So when I went, duh, that's when I said, staff, I need us all to go over and look at it. So anyway, I'm presenting the situation to you. So you know how to pray very, very specifically. Try not to look at the bald spot on the back of my head. I want you to understand that I'm not asking for a vote. I want you to hear that one. I'm not asking for a vote. I'm not really asking for anyone's consent in the traditional sense of the word. I am asking that now that we're sharing this very specific information with you, that you be in dedicated prayer about the matter. And on top of that, we wanted to lay it before you. I wanted to lay it before you in a way that I hope will initiate movement, action, in one direction or the other. But ultimately, we need the helper to resolve this for us. Abraham didn't know Rebekah's name. He just knew that she was out there somewhere. And so he sent Eliezer. And Eleazar laid that fleece before the Lord. And he said, if you'll be kind to my master, let thus and such happen. And so I want us to lay a fleece before the Lord, believing that he will provide what we need, where we need, when we need, how we need. Can you say amen to that? Now, I can't tell you that I know 100% that this is what the Lord wants us to do. I cannot do that. I will not do that. But like I just said, Abraham didn't know Rebekah's name. He just knew that God had made a promise. And he understood the circumstances that he found himself in. And being what they were, he understood that it was time to put things into motion. God has not shouted this to me. And that by that I mean that now is the time. He hasn't shouted that. He hasn't taken me to the top of the mountain like Moses and showed me all the good land before. No, he hasn't done that. However, I do believe that he's been whispering to me. I think he's been whispering to some of us, maybe a lot of us, maybe more than I even realize. Call it crazy, but I think he's been whispering through the Torah portions. There have been these little subtle hints and these little subtle prompts. Just like I said, the last week, the three men appeared. Abraham didn't wait for them to come into the tent. He went to them. He did not want to take the chance that they would pass by. Likewise, if this is what the Lord is putting before us, I don't want to ignore and just let the opportunity pass by. I want to go and invite the Lord to speak to the matter. Can you hear me on that? Okay. This week, the Torah portion whispers, decisions being made for the future, the timing of it all. And then there's the certainty of God's promise, even though there was uncertainty about some of the details, the who, and all these kinds of things. I shared a little bit with you about next week's Torah portion, the 3 wells. He dug one and had to move on from that one. Somebody else laid claim to it. He dug another and somebody came in and laid claim to that. Because to whatever degree, he was subject to the will of others. But when he got to the 3rd well, Rehoboth, that means to spread out. It means to have room. And I'm sorry with everything that's happened, and I'm not even sharing everything with you. It's like God's whispering. And I don't want to take the chance that we ignore what he's setting before us just because we thought we were headed in that direction. Okay? And Isaac said, when they got there, now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Go back to the word that was given to this. Now, I know that this is going to provoke many, many questions. Let me assure you, those questions have already been raised by me, by Beth, by all of the staff. We have some of the same questions that you do. Now, you also need to know this, that the answer to some of those questions that you do have and will have is, I don't know. Okay? And the reason I say I don't know is because I don't know. Well, what about the property? Do we intend to build there? I don't know. Okay? Will we sell that property? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. And by the way, asking the same questions multiple times will not provide a different answer. I also want you to hear me on this. Do not go over there and hang out in the parking lot. Don't be walking around the building, shun-da-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, you know. Don't be doing that. Don't be going over there nosing around their building. Don't be over there just hanging out for somebody to come out the door. So you can go pop your head in. Don't show up over there to service wearing a Jacob's Tent t-shirt saying, I'm here from Jacob's Tent. We're thinking about buying this place. I wanted to check it out. Don't do that. If you do that, you and I are going to go to war. If you've ever wanted to see what Bill is like when he gets mad, do that. But don't do that.
Well, you can't tell me what to do.
You're right. I can't tell you as an individual what to do. But if you go over there representing Jacob's tent and you do something like that, that is a bad representation of Jacob's tent, and that does fall under my jurisdiction. Okay? Now, if you want to see what the place looks like beyond what we've shown you, there is a link that you can go to, and maybe we'll have that. I don't know if Cody can or anybody could put that up on the screen, but there is a link that you can take a virtual tour. And you can see everything that you need to see, okay? So, there's that. Well, what about the conceptual design that we saw 3 years ago at Passover? Is that still on the table? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not certain what will become of that. I don't know everything that God has in store. Here's what I feel like, and Danny showed this video to me the other day, and I was already thinking about it. But if you've seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, at the end of the movie he goes, and if everybody's seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, I don't see movies.
Well, then you don't know what I'm talking about, do you? But everybody that's seen that movie knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's kind of how I feel where I'm at. In some ways, all of us are there in relation to what God's next step is. I don't know everything that God has in store for this congregation. Maybe that, out there is our dream. Like Beth was reminding me this morning when we started designing the house, or she started designing the house, we said, we're going to put everything in it we'd like to have. And then reality set in. And we got some of what we wanted, but we got everything we need. Okay? So, maybe that's our dream, and maybe it is that we need to discover God's will. Maybe there comes a day when that dream is realized. But for now, I don't want to be so focused on what we think is supposed to happen that we miss what God might, and I want to underscore that word again, might be setting before us. Okay? So now, I don't have all the answers. In fact, if you want someone who has all the answers, you've got the wrong guy. I don't know. I'm like you. I'm going to take it one step at a time. I am definitely not like Moses, and I do not have the privilege of being able to go to the tent of meeting and speak God face to face and write everything down verbatim. But I will say this. I'm not afraid to say that even though we thought we were going one way, if the Lord has other ideas, I have no problem surrendering what we thought we were going to do in deference to what he says he's going to do, okay? I want to follow his lead. I know you do too, right? Because whatever he has for us, whatever that is, if we do what he has for us, in the end, we're going to see his wisdom. Can you hang on with me for just another minute or two? All right. I know this isn't something we would typically do on Shabbat. I don't want anybody to be of the mind that this is about business. This is about the future. As I said, a word was given to Mary. What you do quickly. And I believe that word, with a word that was given to Celso, along with what was given to Serena, I believe the Lord was speaking to us. And sometimes we have to stop and pause and listen. We were told you need to prepare the ark, in a manner of speaking. And this is something that Heather said that I thought was very important the other day. The Lord is the one who determined the dimensions of the ark. He is the one who determined how many animals were going to show up at the ark. Noah had nothing to do with that except to do what God told him to do. He couldn't determine how many or how few animals were going to show up. God had all that under control. He just said, do this. All right? So then, when we are told what to do, and when we know clearly what we are to do, we need to obey the Lord's will that his purpose is done. But I might add that What Noah was told to do was very daunting, I'm sure. Probably to him seemed impossible. But then that's where God comes in, right? And so then, and I'm about to close, and everybody says, thank God. But if God is opening a door to us, and I emphasize if, then circumstances are, at least as far as I believe, where we must act quickly, which is not to say imprudently, not to say rashly. We have to use wisdom. We use our brains, but more than anything else, we need our helper. We need guidance from the one who knows all, right? So here is the issue. They're asking $6.75 million, which in the present economy in our area actually is not really excessive. Here's the problem, though. We don't have $6.75 million. We don't even have $1 million. We don't even have $0.75 million. Complicating it further is we are not going to borrow any of that. Not going to do it. Well, Bill, if you don't have the money, if you don't borrow money, that kind of cuts your options down, doesn't it? Yes, it really does. Our options are severely limited. However, what is impossible to us is not impossible to God. Well, I just don't think it's realistic. You're right, it's not realistic. It's not. It's not realistic. Hold your stick out there, Moses. It's not realistic for me to think that this could happen. So I agree with that. But what's impossible to you and me is not impossible to God, and that's where he comes in. He will have to do the impossible. If this is to be, there is only so much that you and I as a congregation can do, and he is going to have to do the rest. But I do think that we have an obligation to take a step to see if this is the Lord's will. I have said from the beginning, and we have all agreed that from the beginning, when it comes the day for us to do something, or when something happens that we have space, everyone will know that it was the Lord, that no man did it, right? And so if this is to be, I guarantee you, we will all know it is the Lord who has done it, all right? But if it is his will, then it is our responsibility to take a step of faith. And that's exactly what it's going to be. And we've done things in times past where it was a step of faith, but this one, we've never had one this big before. This is the biggest one we've ever encountered. In fact, I was thinking about that on the way in. We've had these other little things that all worked out. We just kind of, that's just the way it is here. And it's almost like, well, you think you can trust me for something much bigger? Cody, can you show that mock-up real quick? And I'm going to bring this to a close. If this is the Lord's will, beyond what it would take to attain this property, there would be other things that we'd want to do, and those other things would cost more money, upgrading security, lighting, staging, all those kinds of things, converted unfinished space into a legitimate fellowship hall so that we can go back to having table fellowship the way we used to. Seating for festivals and special events. Now, we don't have to do any of those things up front if we were to obtain this property. We could function just the way it is. The classrooms are all there and ready to go. In fact, Nayla and Carmen were, yeah, that would be a way to put it. Bathrooms, parking spaces, everyone who stays home would have room. It's almost in some ways kind of like what God did for the pilgrims at Plymouth. Someone had prepared the place before they got there. In fact, Danny was impressed with this passage, Deuteronomy 6, verse 10 and 11. So it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you large and beautiful cities, which you did not build, houses full of good things, which you did not fill, wells that you didn't dig, vineyards and olive trees, which you did not plant. So then, here's what I intend to do. I'm going to step out in faith, and I'm going to lay a fleece out before the Lord, and I want you to join with me in that. We lay a fleece before the Lord, and let us pray that he would go before us. Can you agree to that? Can you agree that we will pray that the Lord will go before us in whatever the next step is, wherever it leads, here or something else. Like I said before, I cannot tell you that the Lord has told me this is the place. I can tell you that I feel very confident the Lord has brought me to the place that I feel like now is the time for us to start thinking about taking action, okay? So pray with me that the Lord would go before us. But if we're going to lay out a fleece, we cannot go empty-handed. Eliezer went with 10 camels laden down with gifts. So there will be some indication from us that we mean business, not so much with others, but with the Lord. Okay? And so I intend to make our intentions known, not anything contractual, nothing like that, but I intend to make our intentions known that we want to talk about this very seriously and have a time for due diligence, and in that interim, we'll see what the Lord says. There's a limit to what we can do. There's a limit to what we should do. God has to do the rest. But I'm of the view that our promise is not going to drop into our lap. There are actions that we have to take. And those actions need to demonstrate that our complete dependence is on God and our confidence is in God, that He will perform His promise and He'll bring about for each and every one of us that He's promised to do, and for this congregation. And I need to leave you with one little thought here. This could all fall apart tomorrow. The door could be shut fast and firm tomorrow. And if that were to happen, I'm good with that. I can walk away knowing that we did what we knew to do and the Lord has answered. And really, folks, that's all I really want, is for the Lord to say yes, no, in a very clear way. Okay? I pledge that to you. That's all I want to know. So this could all fall apart. But I'm going to say this. If in any of this the Lord has stirred your heart about this matter, I want you to please pray. Pray. Everybody can do that. Okay? Even you're like, I don't know about this. Well, then pray the Lord will make it very clear to the rest of us. Okay? But if it's on the flip side of it, I feel good about this, then pray that the Lord will make that very clear to everybody. Okay? And if your heart is stirred, then act. But what if we raise a bunch of money? This don't work out. Well, guess what? Then we'll just have money to use the next time some kind of opportunity rolls around. Okay? Whatever that is. Anyway, it's in my heart. I believe it's time for us to move. It's time to prepare for the future. Thank you for your time and attention and indulgence. I felt it was important. Okay?